Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our second edition of the revised R Pharma Hangout sessions in partnership with the R Pharma Conference. My name is Eric Nance, and I'm delighted that you've joined us from wherever you are around the world. And if you did not see our revamped session last month, there were a bit of gotchas in that, so you didn't miss a whole lot. But we are taking a different approach to how we approach a Hangout, so we kind of dive deep into a technical topic that we think is highly relevant to all those of us using open source with R as our statistical computing language in life sciences and beyond. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host for this fine adventure, Jared. Jared, how are you today?
Doing wonderful. Thanks for inviting me and let me be a part of this, Eric.
Oh, it's always a team effort here. But speaking of team, we're not alone this time. We've got a great list of experts here joining us that have been in the realm of package management from both development side and usage side of it. And first, we're going to start with introducing our panel here. So first up is the author of RMV himself, Kevin Ushey. Kevin, why don't you just say a couple words about yourself for those that may not know you?
Uh, Hi, pleased to be here. Thanks. So I've been working at RStudio, now Posit, since I guess about 11 years now for a while. So I primarily work on the RStudio IDE, but I've also had my hand in a number of R packages around the R ecosystem. Uh, and here I'm here to talk about RENV and explain why, well, help explain why I made it, why it exists, and how it can hopefully be useful for you and your projects. Thank you.
Uh, Excellent. Well, thank you for being here. And Kevin and I go way back. We'll talk a bit about that as we go on here. But up next, we have Devin Pastoor. Devin, why don't you introduce yourself for those that may not know you?
Hey folks, Devin Pastoor. I am currently the Chief Technology and Product Officer at A2AI. My background was actually as a scientist, where I cut my teeth on R, recognized that I loved the technology side and the building things as much or more than the science, and I've spent the last decade kind of focusing primarily in the pharma space around how infrastructure and tools and process and training all kind of congeal together to make decisions and kind of act as an organization, and how that really can change whether you're a small company, academic, enterprise. And so part of that, a huge part of that, has been kind of package management in general, the tools on, that you use as a user, the components that go into an organization making decisions around that. So very excited to talk about some of the developments that we've been working on.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here. And last but certainly not least, she's been through the package management adventures for many, many cycles, I would say. Shannon, please introduce yourself.
Thanks. I'm Shannon Pileggi. I'm the Associate Director of Data Science at the Prostate Cancer Clinical Trials Consortium. So I've been in this industry for 4 years, and we have been using RNV for this entire time. And last summer, I gave a talk at PositConf that was born out of our experiences using RNV.
Yep, highly recommended to watch that. We'll make sure one of us can put that in
I'll
the
put in
chat
the link.
here. Yep, very, very good. So, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to dive deep into, as an R user in this industry, I think most can agree that, one of the strengths of R is, of course, the ecosystem of packages. But with that choice comes a bit of responsibility as well, especially when you need to ensure reproducibility, transparency, and be able to set yourself up for success with collaboration. And that's where, if you're not using, may say a framework or even a philosophy to have a good handle on your package dependencies, it may not really get you immediately if you're doing mostly a solo project. But trust me when I say eventually it will come to it will come to bear that you will want to address this. But the good news is we have some really robust tooling on this side to dive into this. So first, I'm going to put it in the chat, and I'll start sharing the fancy schmancy screen sharing here, if I can find where my Zoom control actually went, because I have too many windows open. Let's go ahead and do that. We will be working through most of these Hangout sessions. We're going to have a GitHub repository that will work from, appropriately called R and Pharma Hangouts. But within this, we will have subdirectories for each session. And today we are talking about package management. So I do have, we're not going to read this verbatim, but we are going to look at how we utilize both the renv and the RV utilities for package management in an applied example, just to give a feel for how it works, but also be talking to Kevin, Devin, and Shannon about their experiences through these workflows and sharing tips and tricks along the way. So throughout this, we will be using some example R scripts that, thank goodness, we have frameworks like the Pharmaverse, because the Pharmaverse is home to a wealth of examples in their example repository that cover the full gamut of creating SDTM datasets, Atom datasets, and TLGs and more. So in our repo here, we are going to look at creation of the demographic data set in SDTM and Atom format with ADSL, and as well as a summary table. This is not a Pharmaverse tutorial, but we wanted to show you an example that mimics kind of real practice in terms of what you might do in your day-to-day clinical analysis adventures. But as you'll see, we have split this up into two subdirectories, example RenV and example RV, because we are going to treat these separately, and that will become apparent as this Hangout session goes on. So as we get up to speed here, let's first, as I get my positron bits in order here, let me first get Kevin, if you don't mind, maybe share a little bit about the genesis of RM, because this is not your first adventure in terms of package management due to your adventures with PackRat previously. Maybe share, like, in a few words or more, what motivated you to create RM in the first place.
Yeah, the short version of it is PackRat wasn't great. PackRat had it was not a hit of success. You could be successful using PackRat. It does solve real problems, but it was too easy to find yourself in a place where you use this tool that was, intended to help you with managing your R package dependencies and solving that problem. And there was just too many ways for it to go wrong in a way that was not easy to solve. And so, born from those frustrations, rather than try and fix or rewrite PackRat, I decided let's take what we've learned from PackRat and start again with renv. So, renv is kind of our second effort to make a tool that makes it easy to manage your project's package dependencies, both with management of a project library, so you can install and manage packages in a project without affecting other projects or your user library on the system, and also having a lock file, an actual record of the packages that you can use later to restore those packages, or even just know, like, this is what we were using.
Excellent. So let's see what RM looks like in action here. And here come the live demo. You know what that's about to happen here, but let's say, again, I have these two directories here, and we have a directory with these scripts that I mentioned earlier. They're creating SDTM for the demographic domain. They're creating the ADSL Atom data set, as well as creating a table. So as usual with an R script, we have our loading of packages at the top, and there's a handful here from the Pharmaverse and the Tidyverse and other utilities. And now me as a user am saying, hey, I've heard all the good things about package management. I want to get started with this. So assuming you have renv on your system, you can simply do renv init in a project directory. And here comes the process where it's going to look at what your scripts are loading in the top of your script or elsewhere. And as you can see, it is starting to download these packages from CRAN. Now, of course, depending on bandwidth, this can take a little bit, but I will be transparent. I am on Mac OS as I do this, which means I will be mostly, I believe, installing packages in their binary format. If you're on Linux, that might be being installed by source unless you have changed your package repository to point to, say, the POSIT package manager. So that's just something to be aware of if you are using R on a Linux environment, such as through POSIT Workbench or those types of environments. So as you can see, whenever you have packages, you have dependency of packages. And note here, I'm using R 4.3.3 because I will demonstrate, if we have time, what happens when you decide to move to a new R version. We'll find out if we get there. But just rest assured that renv will work, I believe, in practically any version of R that's semi-modern. I don't believe we have any, even those of you using R version 3 dot something, I believe renv will work there too, if I'm not mistaken. Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
It'll work, but there's been so many updates over the past few years that you're really not going to take advantage of the full product unless you're using a more recent version.
That's an excellent point. If you are starting fresh, yeah, you wanna start with the latest that you have available. I know some companies lock down their repositories quite a bit, so that can be an issue. But one thing actually, Kevin, that I don't think is going to be apparent on this version, as you can see, these are downloading one by one. I believe you've made updates to RM, or at least coming in the near future, that will allow parallel downloads, right?
Yes, that is right. So we're looking at one of the most painful parts of our end is the first time initialization of a big project is going to be quite slow because it's going to download packages in serial, it's going to install them in serial. Each of those steps is going to take some time. Now, RN has this notion of a package cache. So after you've installed and used a particular package version in one project, using it again, those same packages in another project, it'll reuse those packages you installed previously. So that'll be nice and fast. But what we're seeing here is kind of like the brand new RN experience right now, which is quite slow. But the next version is going to parallelize this. So this will be much faster in the next version of RN, hopefully coming within the next couple of weeks to months after we've confirmed that it works as we expect to, no regressions and whatnot.
And
Uh,
another interesting thing I want to call out here is if you're paying attention to these messages, we have the full gamut of installed binary and cache, built from source and cache, or linked from cache. So one concept that both RM and RV will share is the idea of having a cache on your system so that if you have future projects later that depend on those same packages, it'll grab it from the cache if available and not re-download it from scratch. Do I have that correct, Kevin?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's also lots of tools in RNs to configure the location of these caches. You can have like read-only caches if you're an administrator that wants to pre-populate a cache of packages. You can have, multiple different caches. These are more advanced uses of RN, like probably less relevant to an individual user, but if you're thinking of using it in an organization, then that becomes more useful. And the other thing I wanted to say while we're here is one of the key philosophy points of RNV is notice that what Eric has here is it's just a project that uses R in the typical way. And what we're doing here is calling RNV init to say, okay, I have this project, I'm using these packages. Let's capture the current state of what I'm doing. I want a lock file. I want to put it into a private project library. I want to get into a state where I can start managing the reproducibility of my packages. That is, it's not a decision you have to make before the inception of your project. You can take an existing project and make it an RN project. And so it's designed to make it easy to kind of, let's say, fork the state of your current user library, current state of your project, and then encapsulate that into an RN project.
Excellent, excellent. And I do want to note that sometimes the version of R does matter, not just in Shannon's great point there. If you're on a more current version of R, I dare say a lot of the packages that would have been listed here for installation would have had their binary version installed, I believe, which mean because when I trust me, I did test this a little bit of a later version of R, and it was much faster with R version 4.5. But what we like to do in these Hangouts, we like to illustrate what happens in the real world, so to speak, when maybe you don't have the choice of using, say, the latest version of R in your organization. So this has at least been some good conversation starter at this point.
Yeah, and the canonical solution in these scenarios from the Posit side is Posit Package Manager, and so that'll help, especially on Linux, unfortunately not on Mac OS, to provide binary packages so you don't have to go through this rather lengthy install from source step.
Yep, and we will speed it up for RV by going to probably a different version of R on that just to be absolutely safe. But we can, yeah, in fact, we may take a question from the chat here, and anyone can chime in on this. But Victoria is asking just what versions of packages are being used when an older version of R is selected. Is it fair to say that it is what was considered the latest version of a package? And when that version of R was released, or does anybody want to tackle just how is it determine which version of a package to install here?
Yeah, so R has the option called package type, and that helps you choose whether you want source packages, binary packages, or both, which means either, whichever happens to be compatible with the current version of R. So by default on Mac OS, it's going to use the latest available source version or the binary version if that's the same version available as the source version. So even if you're using an older version of R, as long as the newest available packages are still compatible with the version of R you're using, RN will try and install and use those. It doesn't have a notion of what was current at the time of release. If you want that, that's when you want to start thinking about like a snapshotted repository to say, oh, what was the state of CRAN or what was the state of this repository at this point in time? And then you might point a project to say, I want to use this repository, so I have whatever was current at this point in time.
I see. I see. So admittedly, this one's taking longer than I
I think,
anticipated. Yeah, go ahead,
yeah,
Shannon.
I think this is like a little bit of a non-standard workflow that we have happening right now because
Okay,
all you did was execute rnv init, right? Um,
correct.
and rnv init typically does not follow with installation of packages because you're typically using it on a machine that already has those packages installed.
Good
So
point.
then it would just be recording that information for those specific package versions that are on your system. Um, and which I understand you're doing in like a dev environment, and which is why they didn't have the packages installed. But like this is not like a typical first RN init, which makes it a little unclear actually what package versions are being installed on this instance.
I think that leads to a question that Mike had. I just didn't want to lose his either. But yeah, like if I'm understanding you right, Mike, you're asking about that exact scenario where if you're a developer and you are creating these containerized repos of particular package versions with a snapshot, then your add-on to that is RIM for or RM, sorry, to capture or to select the packages for your particular project and isolate or encapsulate those for your use case. Um, I guess like Kevin, is that kind of like again going to kind of Shannon's analogy of that onion layer to to the level that they become for your individual project, and that's how they're able to capture those, or is there a better process that people should follow to do that?
Uh, do you mean in picking the specific package versions you want to use in a project, or?
I think that, if I was an end user, I really wouldn't know, or maybe not know, but not necessarily care about the package version if it was like in a validated, state. But basically knowing how to properly set up my project using RM to grab the right packages, especially from the our, managed repository that all of this is coming from, and ensure that everything I'm doing is in a is being performed correctly, so that when it comes time to any sort of delivery, that it's successful. Does that make sense?
I think so, like a way to guarantee that all the packages used in a project are from a certain or a set of validated repositories. Is
Right,
that right?
right, right. Yep.
Yeah, so the way to get there, there's two ways. There's init, and you can supply the repos option directly to say, I want to initialize my project with these specific repositories. Or there's also like an renv checkout, which is a way of saying, like, give me the packages that I'm using in this project, or give me these specific packages from this set of repositories.
Yep.
Does
I
that
think
make sense?
yeah, great answer. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, feel free to chime in, Mike, on the chat if not. But what good news is it did finish. So let's take a little bit of tour and what just happened in this directory. One thing to note that's very important, and we'll have the same concept with RV as well, is that you have the renv lock file. This is a JSON formatted file that has the metadata associated with both the version of R that was used in this project, as well as the metadata for each of these packages. Usually you don't want to edit this by hand. renv is going to take care of managing this for you to make sure that everything is in this lock file so that you can reproduce this at a later point in time with the renv package itself is available. But what I like to do periodically with renv, and this is where others please chime in too, I like to see what the lay of the land is, so to speak. And that's where I run renv status pretty often, especially if I'm doing new things in my package library. So as you can see, this is what's interesting. This may be an Eric problem here.
You're also using an old version of renv.
There you go. That too. Yep. So I feel like I've already shortchanged the experience a little bit. But this is saying that some packages are in inconsistent state. And these packages, ironically, are ones that come with base R, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong on that. But when you see something like this, I often will do snapshot to make sure that these are registered. When I do that, you'll get a confirmation prompt by default to say, okay, register these versions of packages to your log file, and that will do it. And renv log file will be updated automatically. Once you have that, if we want to do renv status, this is what you want to see. You hope to see this because when you see this, you're a happy camper. Everything's going well. But then if you either remove a package or install a new one, anytime you do that, you'll want to make use of this. And in fact, let's test that out a little bit. Let's say I want to add a package that, well, it isn't quite necessary for the scripts I have here. But actually, before we do that, let's just make sure one of these scripts actually works so that you all don't just think I'm just installing packages without any real reason for it. So let's go ahead and source this. We won't go over the output verbatim, but this should hopefully have no errors here. We do have warnings, but it has nothing to do with renv. That is from one of the Admiral-like packages, I believe. But we have an ADSL that was created, and you can see the data here. So we mission accomplished. We can run the script with the packages that renv installed. Now, what do we do to install a new package? renv gives you a couple options. I will admit, as an early user of renv, my muscle memory is use the renv : install, but you could use install.packages, which is a shim to renv : install when an renv project is available. So this will be you'll wonder why the heck am I about to install this, the RStudio API package, but this just shows you what the process will be like. If we want to show that, now we got it installed here. Now, one thing to note, if we do renv status after installation on this, hey, Eric, then you just say, oh, if you install a package, you should run renv status and it usually picks it up. Note I said usually. because that RStudio API package is not referenced anywhere in these scripts. So unless you're referencing a package in a script, RM's not going to really care what else you install because it doesn't mean anything in what it discovers. But there are options to tweak that a bit. But if I had simply added, now just for kicks, a library RStudio API, let's save that and let's rerun this. Oh, there it is. Now it registers for it because by default, RM will look in these scripts of your project directory. Any new library statement, it will say, oh, they want to use it. So that is important. But if you have issues with that, Kevin's already on the spot with an example on the RM site to let you get better handle on why packages may not be getting registered for a snapshot. So that's a highly recommended reading if you want to pursue that. So if I save this again, I run this again, now we're back to RM is happy, nothing else is introduced here. So I think that's pretty neat. The other reason I wanted to install that, this is a bit, stop, positron, be quiet. I have a fun little function here from the RStudio API. Oh, come on, our positron. Okay. Whoa, I don't want you to do the spell check thing. I just want to copy this one lot. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Okay. Positron, why does it do that to me? Anyway, there's a cool little function here. Pretty appropriate if you do a screencast. If you want to pull up a URL in Positron itself with the viewer, run that RStudio API viewer. You can run this. I may use that from time to time. But that, in essence, is the basics of getting up and running with RM. I think once you get the hang of it, it can be pretty self-explanatory. Once you start to work with it, again, highly recommend Shannon's talk from last year's PositConf for some things that can happen if you're not careful about when you launch RM, depending on which R version you're running, especially if you migrate to a new RM or new R version, and dealing with package versions as they get updated throughout the life cycle of their development. But that's not the only game in town. We also have RV, the new kid on the block, as they say in package management. So, Devin, why don't you take a few minutes to walk through kind of the genesis of why does RV even exist now? What was the motivation behind it?
Probably, I want to go back to Mike's question briefly first, and it'll tie into RV, I guess. This philosophical question that really hits at the enterprise level around how do you provide our environments to users that encapsulate everything that they need. So we think of these statistical compute environments, they have access control, they have the data and all of that. And then you get to the fact that you have R and you have these R packages. And so philosophically, companies are wrestling with the balance between providing kind of, we'll call it enterprise IT governed setups where packages are controlled with a governance strategy that has some degree of engagement across the organization, but is ultimately like enforced and provided by IT. So this is where you might have a container or an entire installation that has fixed packages. You have very little control to actually modify that. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum. This is further exacerbated by this tension between the way that a lot of science is conducted is heavily iterative. And so you have to balance this desire to have an environment from which you can iterate, but then at some point in time, you need to lock down and trace what's going on. And there's a huge spectrum of how groups are solving that and the kind of how much they care. I don't want to say how much they care, but how much they've actually built out a structure in place to enable guaranteeing that. And so, for example, this is where we'll see some companies are doing things like using CI/CD type principles where you can develop in Posit Workbench, but you're going to like check code into a repository. And then like the final run of that is going to go run somewhere else where whether it's a container or whether it's something else kind of is besides the point, but it's that something there where like that whole, like it worked on my machine becomes kind of impossible because it has to go run somewhere else. Other groups are using business process or other activities to kind of surround how work is done. And there's frankly a lot of practical implications to this. You can solve this about a billion different ways if you're making TFLs that take 10 seconds to run. But when you have a model that takes 4 days to run and you've run it in your iterative environment, you don't want to go spend another 4 days running it in the kind of reproducible, isolated environment. And so there's a lot of tension depending on kind of which group you are or the types of activities you're performing. But ultimately, this rolls up to how the heck, as an organization, especially for larger ones, do you provide governance? What at least we've observed kind of interacting with a lot of like kind of we'll call top 10 pharmas down to small biotechs is there is more and more appetite to provide flexibility. And flexibility is both to give users more capability to do, we'll call it cutting edge work, but also recognizing that it is difficult from an enterprise IT organization to kind of sustain the needs of the business in a way that like their requirements are met, the governance is met. And so you end up like getting these situations where enterprise IT will give you like one new package set per year or something like that. And then it corresponds to an R version upgrade, and there's like a whole bunch of stuff that goes on in the environment, and then it has a lot of implications when that transition is happening on like ongoing work. And so the kind of area that a lot of companies are exploring is, can that ownership model shift where business is more responsible for identifying that the package usage in their projects is suitable, and IT is responsible for providing a platform for which that works. And this is where, whether you use RV or renv or pack or something like that, you need things on the system. You need versions of R. You need system dependencies. You need components to like allow execution to happen that has to happen from an administrative perspective. But then you can have more fluidity within that, particularly if you're dealing with things where like people are working on different projects that started at different points in time, paused at different point in time, they're needing to jump between those. And so, philosophically, I think my take on this is there's no right or wrong answer. The wrong answer, though, is attempting to like really lean one direction while not backing it up. Where like you, for example, are like, we're gonna like lock down everything and enterprise IT is going to govern everything. And then you don't complement that with like giving people an environment for which they can experiment. And then suddenly like it becomes shadow IT, people running things on their laptop. Like there's all sorts of stuff that happens that makes that divergence much more apparent in like how science gets conducted and communicated. So, if you're going to go containers, great. Make sure that people can run those containers themselves, and it's not a thin straw that they have to push a script up somewhere and let it run for 5 minutes to see if it actually even executes. So
I'd
no
imagine
answer,
a future
but,
hangout will address containers because I have a soft spot for how that works. But yeah, let's see what RV looks like in
so
action.
what
Yeah,
I can do, can I grab the screen
you
share?
sure can. Yeah, absolutely.
So I just pulled your project.
Mm-hmm.
Sight somewhat unseen, but we'll see if we can get this puppy to run.
I will tell you, I did a dry run this weekend and it seemed to work. So
I at least ran one piece. So I think this is probably a more resonant environment for people on this call that are especially dealing with companies where you're in a kind of Linux environment. You hopefully may have a couple versions of R. You're using Posit Workbench, and you're working on some code. And this is, I think, where Kevin mentioned that renv was really meant to kind of meet you where you were around, like, you can start however the heck you want. And at a given moment in time, if you want to kind of detect what is on your system and make that such that hopefully you can bring that over to another system and reconstruct it. RV takes a much more strongly opinionated stance on how you can approach our package management. And like very transparently, it's not for necessarily every situation. Granted, we've tried to make it flexible enough that you can use it for various situations, but it was really designed for people working in projects, in environments that they expect to be able to reconstruct them, and that there's going to be some degree of desire to coordinate and collaborate, where you might not have you may have control or not have control over which versions are appropriate. So we want to kind of set the stage for recognizing that governance is an important part for groups. So we wanted to do that, and we recognize that like there are some friction points for any package management solution that exists as a library, which is like you have to install a library to manage your packages. And if you have 5 versions of R, some compiled different ways, it means you need like a whole bunch of copies of that package manager. And so RV, we made a decision to move this out of R, where the command line was the focus point. And in doing that, we decided to pick a technology, Rust, that basically allowed us to invert the developer challenges. So with renv as the kind of most core R capable environment manager, like it takes advantage of all the stuff that R gives you. And then you have to like build some more stuff on top of it. But like even to, Kevin's mention of the parallel installs, like that was made available because it became available in R to a large part. And then there's more work that needs to go on top, but it's really about embracing what R gives you and then building on top of it. For RV, we kind of stepped back and we said, if we compare some of the challenges with our renv, and we also can compare some of the issues with pack, not that we're talking about pack, but pack itself, if you look at the implementation, it's like wildly complex because Gabor had to build an entire ecosystem, like process management, parallelization, dependency solving, like had to build the world to provide a package installation toolkit. And we decided that we wanted to take advantage of an ecosystem that gave you a lot of that stuff. And that came from this Rust ecosystem. We get the parallelization, we get, enterprise cert management, we get the fact that it can compile down into a single binary that's a couple megabytes that will run on every single version of Linux all at once. And it can interact with all versions of R. So you put one copy of RV in your HPC environment and everyone can use it for all our environments right there. So connected to that from this opinionated perspective, this idea is you're in a project. And then we wanted it to be at the forefront of, instead of you building up your environment like piecemeal in a way that you actually invoke the commands that construct your environment. Instead, we wanted people to be able to build up their environment incrementally, but to do so by declaring what their end state they wanted. So in this case, we look at this and we say, okay, we want our version 4.5. We want packages from Posit Package Manager, and we want these packages. How you get there is up to RV. The fact that you want this is what you're kind of operating with. So it's that kind of inversion from renv or renv. I keep calling it renv, even though it is canonically renv. And so you declare this. Now, to Eric's demo, I'll have to slip him a 20 for showing what can sometimes go wrong during the installations if you don't know what's going on. Like RV also recognized that happens all the time, especially if you're in a new environment. And so what we wanted to do is say, you want to be able to declare what you want, and you want to be able to inspect your environment before action is actually taken. So RV has a whole bunch of commands that you can run to understand what would happen without actually doing it. So if you identify things like, a bunch of sources will get pulled in that's going to take time to compile, or this, that, or the other thing, you can decide if you want to do that now, later, or ever. So the first command that we can kind of show is like, if I run RV plan, what RV plan is going to do is it's going to come out and it's going to kick out and say, in order to give you all of these packages, I would need to install 62 packages actually. And from that, I'm going to show you, I'm going to go out to the package manager. I'm going to look to see if there are binary or sources available. And I'm going to tell you exactly where I would find them, or prefers binary if possible. And then it's also going to do things like it's going to check on your Linux system, like, do you have all the dependencies there? Because that's one of the kind of discrepancies, like on Linux with a binary, it doesn't run necessarily unless you also have the system dependencies. This is a difference from Windows and Mac, where they're kind of self-contained. Linux, they're not self-contained. A little asterisk to some of the work that Posit's currently doing on that. But so like RV is going to look at all of that. And so you can then take a look and you can decide, like, does this make sense? We also have a higher level summary command that tells you this information, like kind of at a glance, if you don't want the specificity of like every single thing. So it's going to say, yeah, I'm picking up that you're on Ubuntu. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to put kind of 6 workers when we perform this activity. And this is where some of the enterprise stuff comes in. Like, we spent a lot of time thinking about how pharma companies, especially in server environments, operate. So like, we actually behave differently if you're using a network file system, which has like intrinsically very different file system semantics. It's going to tell you a little bit more about what's going on. And then ultimately, if this looks good, you're like, okay, I want to install these things. And so when you run this, you can RV sync, and like that just installed all of the package. Now I got, like, I'm kind of cheating here a little bit because we can see here these came from the cache. And
exactly.
So really,
the cache is important because it speeds things up.
It didn't install them, but to kind of show how fast this still is, like, I'll blow away the cache. So let's just like, I'm going to kill my library. I'm also going to kill the entire RV cache. Might take a second. Because it has all the caches from all the packages everywhere. So it's kind of going to purge the system.
And if that's a network file system, yes, latency is a thing.
Yeah. So this is now
ask me why I know. Yeah.
Cleaning however many gigabytes of packages across all my projects. Probably should have purged a little bit more precisely here. But while this is running, I can kind of talk through this a little bit more. So RV is going to give you a suite of tools to kind of appreciate what is in your project environment, where things might exist, and things like caches. Be able to introspect it from a kind of a data perspective. In addition, we call these things out because there's a lot of cases that we've found that are very prevalent in company environments where the kind of ethos of everything comes from a singular repository like CRAN is not really possible these days, especially when you start to have internal packages, maybe packages in different states. And so we wanted to like really lean into the concept of like, you may have multiple repositories. And you might not only have multiple repositories, you might need to mix and match them in a way that is very difficult with the default R tooling. The default R tooling is going to look through and it's going to say, do I find it in the first repository? If so, good. If not, go to the next one. If not, go to the next one. In this case, you can start to mix and match things, different repositories, different points in time, PPM, old. I really need an older version of some package, drop that back to 2025, say a year ago. Then you could say, like, I really need the dflyer package. Whoa.
And one note as he's editing that, this is in what's called a TOML format. It's kind of like it's not quite like JSON, but it's another markup-y type of layout that you can use for your settings and syntax.
And my positron's going wild too right now. It's just like
apparently
wild
contagious.
Positron time today. Repository equals, look at that. All right, hang on one second. Let me switch over to RStudio, the good old fallback of just in case positron.
It's nice to have choice, isn't it?
Yes. Let's just pop open a new project in the Hangouts.
While this is going on, I could also, if anybody wants to touch the idea around the question, I think that was asked earlier about a package called, get back up here, RExpress.
Point taken. RExpress is
RExpress.
it's the leveraging Nix as the way to manage the package dependencies, which I think is quite intriguing. Some of you have heard my talks know I'm fully on the Nix train, so to speak, for my personal systems as well as my data projects. I think there's great potential there. It does have a bit of a learning curve to adopt, especially the Rix package is like a great way to opt into its API from R itself. But there's still some gotchas here and there that I'm working through. But it is somewhat similar to RV's philosophy. Everything's declarative. You want to use dplyr, you want to use Admiral, you will declare this in the Nix kind of config. It's just got its own DSL for how that's configured. So I would imagine in a future Hangout session, we'll dive into a lot of that in greater detail.
And just to give you a chance to speak, Shannon, was there any point you wanted to add in or talk about this while we're getting this set up?
All right now.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. So let's take a look at this now that I got the cursor's back working. So in this case, what I've done is I've now said dplyr. I want to actually pull from this old repository from a year ago for whatever reason. In this case, when I run a plan, what this is going to now show is that we see all of these packages coming in, but if we go to dplyr, we can actually see that this is coming from 2025 instead of 2026. And so it forces you to think about where your packages are coming from, but it gives you a lot of expressivity. And this is one of the things from a communication perspective that we think is like a powerful benefit when you have a team. Like with renv, you construct your environment, you can build this lock file, and then like when you have that lock file and someone has a question of like, does it have any packages from Git? Does it have this? Does it have that? Like you have to go traverse that lock file and kind of look into it and think about this thing that's really meant for a tool to reconstruct, but you're suddenly needing to use that yourself versus like, these are the things that I care about. This is the configuration that I care about. And then we can decide if we want to, as an organization, like apply certain best practices or guidance or other piece where it's like, much easier from like a QC and a governance perspective to check on this. So let's kill that old one and let's take a look at the installation for this now. So we're back here, no cache, no anything. And we can see here if we now like RV sync this, like that's the installation time, including downloading it from Posit Package Manager and installing all of those packages. And so this is about the slowest you'll ever see managing packages. And so like we're very thrilled with that type of performance. And it really gives you as a group, especially if you have like Posit Package Manager and you have binaries, a way to feel more confident that you can try things. You can now go in and you can say, all right, like what if I want to add another package? So if we come in here and we go into your, like, I think I'd pulled this one open and grabbed the packages from here. So now there's some other thing like here. Okay, great. So like RStudio is picking up packages, Pharma vs. Raw and STDM Oak are not available. So like we want to add these. So kind of a couple ways we can add them. We could go and manually edit that TOML file, or we can just type it into the command. RV add stdm.oak and then pharma verse raw. And if I do a dry run, this is going to tell me that like, hey, in order to install those two, I would need to install these 3 packages actually, right? So, oh, look at that. Assert that would also need to come in to actually satisfy this. If I'm happy with that, I can then run an installation and then it installs these. So a quick, fast, kind of iterative way of kind of building up these packages. We still ultimately construct a lock file as well. So you have that whole like, there's your like declaration of what you need, but then you still have the lock file that gives that kind of hermetic sealing of like, if someone else takes this, it's going to go to the lock file first and build everything from the lock file, and then take this kind of configuration file from there. For people that are interested to learn more about RV, there are we have a docs website that kind of goes through all the various things that you can do with it. It has some cookbook examples. And like, I'd encourage you to explore some things like the cookbook, because this has been built off a lot of the challenges with us, like balancing the desire to experiment as scientists with the practical like reality of like code quality is different across some grad students package that they had 2 years ago and have stopped maintaining and has some funky description file versus like an internal package that has a lot of quality gates. Like, we give you a lot of control to do things that are valuable in a company environment. So you can, override certain things. If you're pulling something from Git, but you want to then actually pull packages from somewhere else, like you can go in and hook in. And again, build this in a way that ultimately allows a degree of transparency of what would go on.
Excellent. Devin, we may want to cut it short there because Kevin actually, I didn't give RM the Ferris a shake with that installation on the older R version. So Kevin, if you'd like to share a little bit more concretely some of those improvements that you've been making in RM and recent releases, yeah, I want to give you a few minutes to do that.
Yeah, I just want to convince you and others on this call that we're not slouching on our end. It's not
not in the least. Yeah,
it's
I
not a
watch the
finished
news
product. We
file
do still
regularly.
want to improve the performance and improve things where you can. So I'm going to steal the screen sharing from Devin. So are you seeing our studio now?
We are, yeah.
Okay, so I want to give kind of the moral equivalent fresh initialization of the example RN package using right now I have the development version of RN installed. So first I'm going to set an option to disable the cache just to give the same, like I'm going to disable the cache. What's this going to look like? And now if I run rn init, first thing it's going to do is going to copy some packages that I already had installed. It's going to download everything in parallel. It's going to install binaries. It's going to take a little while, it goes through that. And then we're going to eventually get, okay, there's one package we need to install from sources. That's RCPP, Armadillo, C++ sources. So it takes a little while to compile and install, but not the end of the world.
But yeah,
Once we
look at
get
that
that,
list above. Oh, there we go. That was about 10
and
seconds. That's great.
now we're done. So this is what I'm hoping is the more typical RN experience and what will be more typical once we get this onto CRAN. So we are going to have parallel downloads, parallel installs. So that first time in it where you don't have a warm cache, it's going to be a lot more performant.
That's terrific. Yeah, that's again, it's great to see both of these adopting the modern practices of being able to do things in parallel, install from binary if possible. Those of us on Linux, we appreciate these enhancements. It is very, very welcome for sure. So I guess we'll have some time for additional questions if they come in, but this webinar this hangout was never meant to say you must use RV, you must use RM, you must pick one and no, like fit what's best for your workflow, right? And I think a lot of orgs are in the stage where R is still the main driver and their data scientists are still very much wanting to use R for all of their management. RM is very tailored to that case. Then you have those that are working in a more multilingual environment, but also an environment where, as Devin said, there are some issues to resolve in terms of managing dependencies at an organizational level and be able to really pick and choose some granular details. I think RV shows a lot of promise. I am going to use it a bit more in some of my other newer projects and get a feel for that. But I think it's definitely solving a lot of needs. And between these two, you've got great choice in here to adopt this to your project. and as a whole in your organization. Nothing's perfect, but I think to Kevin and Devin's credit, they are actively maintaining each of these. Anytime you find an issue, they're just one issue tracker away for helping out and finding out some of those bugs to solve for sure.
And from when I knew Devin when he was working at Posit, he's absolutely one of the smartest people I know. So I would not bet against him if their RV is successful.
I guess I'm slipping Kevin a 20 now too. Jeez, I'm gonna be,
Just when I
Um,
thought you guys were gonna duke it out.
yeah,
No,
we didn't.
For
We didn't
us,
have like the
one of the things that has like Kevin's experience on PackRat helped shape renv. Renv also has to cover an enormous spectrum of random grad student using Windows, blah blah blah. Like we got to cheat, so to speak, so much because we got to look at Pack, we got to look at renv, we got to look at UV, we got to take advantage of a whole bunch of like literally a decade of learnings and then start from there. And so it is incredibly difficult from a product perspective in general to like maintain continuity of the product, add new things, like do all of those things all at once. And so like RV has it has been nice to move with a degree of velocity at the moment, but we can only do that because we started from scratch. And actually, as a fun factoid, like we as an organization still use renv as like the mode of distribution because it's such a low common denominator at this point in time, where you can just RV add renv and then use that to renv snapshot, which like because RV gives you the repositories, the package versions, all that, like renv snapshot always gives you like the exact lock file you want. And so you don't even have to say like you have to only use one or the other. No. Like you can find what makes sense for you as an organization, and to some extent mix and match.
I love that. And I want to give the floor to Shannon to help close us out here. As based on your experience and what you've seen today, but also since your great talk at PosiConf, what do you want to leave our viewers with in terms of additional tips to adopting a package management strategy in your organization that you think can set people up for success, whether it's your experience of RM or even just the philosophies around this in general?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that reproducibility is a hard problem. So come in like just ready to get your feet wet. Don't be naive thinking like, oh, there's a tool out there and it's just going to solve all my problems. Like you have to be a responsible user of that tool.
Yes, responsible usage. It's in fact a lot of the talk around AI. We often say responsible use of AI. It's a very similar idea in that sense too. So yeah, I think this has been really informative, and we will have again. I'll put on the GitHub repo an updated commit that has both RMV and RV Bootstrap, so you can look at that afterwards when we get the recording out. But I definitely want to take this time to thank so much Kevin, Devin, and Shannon for joining us on our Pharma Hangout today. We really like getting in the weeds on these topics when a typical conference talk just doesn't give us enough time to really get into the nuts and bolts of these, and having and with Shannon alongside here to dive into the internals and philosophies, I think has been really illuminating. So stay tuned. We will try to do this on a monthly basis, and we're still lining up our next topic. But yeah, if you do want to hear about additional frameworks that take dependency management to another level with, say, containers or Nix, just let us know because I'm sure we can find some good experts to talk to us about those as well. But with that, I think we will close up shop here. And yeah, as Jared says, save the chat for the links that have been shared. There's been a lot of good ones, but we will have a blog post on the R Pharma site that collects all these links as well, along with the recording after yours truly gets through his editing, especially when he fumbled through things in the beginning. But nonetheless, we thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you hopefully next month for our next R Pharma Hangout session. Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
thank you.
And
Stop sharing and